In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can use phylogenetic trees in our studies of biology. So we're going to look at analyzing phylogenetic trees and figuring out what we learn through that analysis. So in our class previously, we've already talked about this overall phylogenetic tree of life. And we've talked about how we organize living things into these three different domains. Here we've got the bacteria domain. These are all prokaryotic organisms. They're all single-celled organisms. Then in the center here, we've got the archaea domain. Again, these are all prokaryotic organisms. They're all single-celled organisms. What's unique about the archaea is that they're generally what we call extremophiles. So they live in these extreme environments, like extremely hot environments, extremely salty environments, or environments with extreme pHs, and many others. And then the last domain is the eukarya domain. And that's where we've got things like animals and plants and fungus. These are all organisms where cells contain a nucleus, which sets them apart from the other two. So we've looked at this phylogenetic tree of life already, but I wanted to use a simplified version of this tree of life for the rest of our discussion. So I'm going to simplify that tree. And I'm just going to draw it like this with three simple branches. So we'll start at the bottom, the first living thing on Earth, and we'll go up the branches to these three domains that exist around us today. And again, those domains are the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya. And I wanted to use this simplified tree that lacks the detail of all the extra branches demonstrating all the different kinds of bacteria or all the different kinds of archaea, all the different kinds of eukaryotes. We'll use this simplified version to demonstrate how we can analyze one of these phylogenetic trees and what we can learn about these organisms. So the question becomes, what can we learn from this phylogenetic tree? To learn things from the phylogenetic tree, I'm going to encourage you to do one thing only. And we're going to quantify the relationships. We're going to learn about the relationships by counting the branch points. So I want to talk about the branch points in this tree. A branch point in a tree is anywhere that one line diverges and becomes two lines. So right here, near the bottom of the tree, we're coming upwards and we hit this branch point, a spot where that single line at the bottom diverges into two lines that head in different directions. So that's one branch point on this tree. As we proceed up the tree, we'll find that there is one more branch point on this tree where one line diverges and becomes two separate lines. So there are only two branch points in this tree. Depending on how complicated the tree is, there could be many, many branch points. But here we'll use this one with just two. And again, we want to quantify the relationships in this tree. We want to learn about what is the relationship between archaea and eukarya. What's the relationship between bacteria and archaea? This is a little bit like a family tree. Siblings would be really close together on a family tree because they're close relatives. But cousins, let's say, would be really far apart on a family tree. So we want to learn about what kind of relationship do these organisms have. Is it a sibling relationship or a cousin relationship? All right, so we're going to look at each relationship individually. And so on this tree, there's a few relationships we can look at. We can look at the relationship between bacteria and archaea. We can look at the relationship between bacteria and eukarya. And then lastly, we can look at the relationship between eukarya and archaea. And again, the way we're going to analyze these relationships is to count the branch points that sit between these organisms along the line. So let's demonstrate that. Let's think about this bacteria to archaea relationship. So if I start out here at the bacteria, at the end of the bacteria branch, and then I trace along the line, trying to get over to the archaea, I go through one branch point and a second branch point, and then I get to the end of the branch that has archaea. So I've just learned that there are two branch points separating bacteria and archaea, and I'm going to write that information down. And I'm going to continue my analysis for the other relationships I'm interested in. So again, bacteria to eukarya. Bacteria, we'll start there, trace backwards, one branch point, 2 branch points. You count it even if you don't change directions. If it's a branch point, count it. So that's our second one. And we get to eukarya. So bacteria and eukarya also have a relationship of 2 based on this tree. So let's analyze our last relationship, and that would be the one between eukarya and archaea. So start at eukarya, trace the line backwards. We go through 1 branch point, and we connect to the archaea. So we just learned that eukarya and archaea have a relationship of 1. The lower this number, the fewer the branch points, the closer the relationship. The higher the number gets, the greater the number of branch points, the more distant the relationship gets. So again, if we think about these organisms as being part of a family, we would say that eukarya and archaea are like siblings. They have the closest relationship on this tree. And then both eukarya and archaea have this cousin, bacteria, a more distant relative that's 2 branch points away. So that's how we can analyze one of these phylogenetic trees. Identify the branch points, and then count the branch points that are between 2 organisms on the tree. And then we can compare the number of branch points. Fewer branch points tells us that that's a closer relationship. A greater number of branch points tells us that's a more distant relationship. And that's it. Before we move on, I just want to point out that this tree actually says something really interesting when we look at the relationships that way. We learn that archaea and eukarya are close relatives, closer relatives than either of them are to bacteria. But that's really weird, right? Both bacteria and archaea are single-celled prokaryotic organisms, whereas eukaryotic organisms are, they have a nucleus, and many of them are multicellular. So just by thinking about that, you would say that doesn't make sense that archaea and eukarya are like siblings. It makes more sense that bacteria and archaea should be the siblings. They have this really profound similarity. No nucleus, single-celled. But through modern-day genetic analysis, we know that they aren't close relatives. Archaea and eukarya are, and that bacteria is a more distant relative to those 2. So we can learn really profound things by looking at a phylogenetic tree like this. So before we end, I just want to point out a couple more details about trees, things that tend to give students difficulty when they see different kinds of trees. And that's that they can look different ways. So I just want to think about some variations that we can see in phylogenetic trees. And first, that's the general shape. So I've been showing this tree where the lines diverge off at an angle, so we get these like V-shaped branch points. But that, not all phylogenetic trees are represented in that way. So I want to show you another version. So here's another phylogenetic tree that represents the exact same information, the exact same relationships. Everything we can learn from the tree is identical to what we learned from the last one. And so in this one, all the lines are perpendicular to one another. Everything's at a 90-degree angle. But again, it tells us the same thing. So if we start at the bottom, at the root, and come upwards, we hit this branch point where one line diverges to the left and another to the right. So there's one branch point here. If we go out towards the bacteria, I want to point out that when a line turns a corner, it's still just one line. So a corner is not a branch point. Where one line diverges into 2 lines, that is a branch point. So again, one branch point here, and then another one right up here, where archaea and eukarya diverge from one another. So again, don't get thrown off by the shapes of the lines. They can be angled like the previous version, or they can be perpendicular like this version. Only count the branch points, and again, we see the same relationships. Archaea is 1 branch point away from eukarya. Archaea is 2 branch points away from bacteria. So again, it's the exact same relationships we saw in the previous tree. The next variation I want to point out is that the order of the names at the tops of these branches can change without affecting the relationships in the tree. So let's look at an example. So right now we've got bacteria on the far left, then archaea, then eukarya. those names, the order of those names can change, and the tree can say the exact same thing. So here's an example. I just changed it so that it's now bacteria on the far left, eukarya in the middle, and archaea on the far right. So the order of these names doesn't tell me anything. Remember, it's the branch points in the tree that tell me something. And so I've switched the position of eukarya and archaea, but there's still just one branch point in between these two organisms. That's just like the past two trees. And if we think about the archaea to bacteria relationship, there are still 1, 2 branch points connecting them. That's just like the previous two trees. So don't pay attention to the order of the names at the top of a tree. That can really throw you off as a student. Pay attention to the branch points within the tree. And that's where all the important information lies. And just to demonstrate that one more time, I'm going to shake this tree up and show it to you in one more way that means the exact same thing as every tree we've looked at so far. And I could switch it so now that eukarya is on the far left, archaea is in the middle, and bacteria is on the far right. Again, I've changed the order of the names, but I have not changed the information in the tree because there is still a single branch point right here between eukarya and archaea, and there are still 2 branch points between eukarya and bacteria, one here and one here, and 2 branch points between archaea and bacteria, again, one here and one here. So again, I just encourage you not to pay attention to the order of names or the shapes of the lines. Find the branch points, count the branch points between organisms you are trying to understand, and then use the number of branch points to help you understand the relative relationships between organisms. So I'll end there. I'll look forward to talking to you in class or on the discussion boards, and we'll see you later.